Her name was Zara, and she had learned to live with the whispers. They followed her like a shadow she could never outrun. The children at the orphanage had been the first to point and giggle, calling her the cracked doll. Later, in the dusty village where she worked as a seamstress, the women would pull their shawls tighter when she passed, as if her face might somehow infect their perfect skin. On her left cheek, from her temple down to the edge of her jaw, a raised, twisted web of scars spread like the roots of an ancient, gnarled tree. The story behind them was simple and brutal. A cooking fire had tipped over when she was 3, and the boiling oil had kissed her skin forever. By the time Zara turned 22, she had stopped explaining. She had stopped hoping. Her world had shrunk to the 4 walls of her small tailoring shop, a tiny space filled with the hum of a sewing machine and the smell of fresh cotton. She spoke to no one, unless a customer needed a hem fixed or a button replaced. Most people, however, brought their clothes to the plump, smiling widow across the street. Zara survived on the scraps, the torn uniforms of poor farmers, the torn trousers of shepherd boys. She was invisible, and she had made a strange kind of peace with that. The village of Lospur was a forgotten dot on the map, a place where nothing ever happened. That was, until the army came. A border dispute to the north had turned hot, and the government needed a forward supply base. Lospur, with its flatlands and empty barns, was perfect. For 3 weeks, trucks rumbled through the main street, and soldiers in crisp olive-green uniforms set up tents and radio towers. The villagers were both excited and terrified. They had never seen so many officers, so much authority. Among the troops was a man known only as the General. His real name was General Ashraf Khan, a legend in the military. He was 61 years old, with a chest full of medals and a face carved from granite. He had led men through ambushes, negotiated hostage releases, and once walked into an enemy camp alone to retrieve the body of a fallen soldier. He was not a man who startled easily. He was not a man who showed weakness. But he carried a secret behind his eyes, a ghost that had followed him for nearly 2 decades. One rainy afternoon, the general's personal uniform was torn. A stray piece of barbed wire at the new checkpoint had snagged his sleeve, ripping it from elbow to cuff. His adjutant, a young lieutenant named Bilal, panicked. There was no tailor in the military camp, and the general had a meeting with regional commanders in less than 3 hours. A local shopkeeper pointed them toward the end of the street, to a small, dimly lit shop with a faded sign, Zara's Repairs. Lieutenant Bilal walked in first. He saw a young woman with her back to him, her dark hair tied in a simple braid. She was bent over a sewing machine, her hands moving fast. "I need a uniform repaired. Quickly," he said, his voice carrying the impatience of a man used to being obeyed. Zara turned. Bilal saw her face and took an involuntary step back. It was not disgust, exactly more like shock. He had seen battle wounds, but this was different. The scars were old, thick, and shiny, pulling the left side of her mouth into a permanent, slight downturn. He recovered quickly, being a trained officer, but the damage was done. Zara saw the step back. She saw the flicker. She had seen it 1,000 times. She said nothing. She took the uniform, inspected the tear, and nodded. 45 minutes, she said, her voice low, and even Bilal paid half in advance and rushed back to the command tent. He told the general the uniform was being fixed, but he added, a little too quickly, "The tailor is unusual, sir. She has a disfigurement. I can send another man to pick it up." General Ashraf Khan looked up from his maps. He had been staring at troop movements for 4 hours, and his eyes were tired. "Unusual how?" he asked. "Her face, sir. Scars, quite severe." The general grunted. He didn't care about faces. He cared about stitching. An hour later, with the rain still falling, he decided to pick up the uniform himself. He needed to stretch his legs. He walked through the mud, ignoring the salutes of younger soldiers, and pushed open the door to Zara's shop. She was holding the finished uniform, inspecting her own work. The repair was invisible. The thread matched the olive green perfectly, and the stitches were so small and tight that they looked like the work of a machine. She heard the door and looked up. The general stopped. But he did not step back. He did not flinch. His eyes went to her scars, and then something strange happened. His body stiffened. Not in disgust, in recognition. His shoulders went rigid. His jaw tightened. For a long, terrible moment, he simply stared. His right hand, which had been reaching for his wallet, froze in the air. Zara felt the familiar heat rise in her chest. Here it comes, she thought. The pity, the revulsion, the awkward kindness. But the general's expression was none of those things. It was something she had never seen before. Raw, unguarded shock, followed by a deep, aching sorrow. "Those scars," he said, his voice barely a whisper. His voice, which had commanded thousands of men, now cracked like dry wood. "How did you get them?" Zara was confused. No one ever asked. They just assumed. "A cooking fire," she said, repeating the lie the orphanage had taught her. "When I was small." The general shook his head slowly. His eyes were wet. "No," he said. "That's not true." He took a step closer, and Zara instinctively backed up against her sewing table. "There were 5 children," he said. "A village called Marin. A fire, not a cooking fire. A mortar shell. 20 years ago." Zara's blood turned cold. She had no memory of that night. She had been told the fire was an accident. She had been told her parents died of sickness. But something deep inside her, something she had buried since childhood, began to stir. A faint echo of screaming. The smell of smoke and burning flesh. The general pulled a small, worn photograph from his breast pocket. It was creased and faded, the edges soft from years of handling. He handed it to Zara. In the picture, a young officer, a younger General Ashraf Khan, stood next to a smiling woman holding a baby. The baby had a small, unmarked face, dark eyes, and a tiny hand reaching for the camera. On the back of the photograph, in faded ink, were the words, "My wife, Amara. My daughter, Zara. Marin, 1996. Zara dropped the uniform. Her hands began to shake. She looked at the photograph, then at the old soldier in front of her. The same strong jaw, the same deep-set eyes, the same way of standing, straight and immovable. "You are my father," she whispered. It was not a question. The general nodded, and for the first time in 20 years, a tear rolled down his scarred, weathered cheek. He had been told his wife and daughter died in the shelling. He had mourned them. He had built a shrine in his home. He had never remarried. And now, in a tiny tailoring shop in a forgotten village, the ghost had come to life. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the shop remained thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Zara stood motionless, the photograph trembling in her fingers. Her mind raced through a maze of broken memories and half-truths. The orphanage director had always been vague about her past. Other children had received letters, family visits, or small gifts on their birthdays. Zara received nothing. She had assumed she was unwanted, forgotten, a mistake that the world had tried to burn away. Now, looking at the face of the man who claimed to be her father, she felt something she could not name. It was not joy. It was not anger. It was a hollow, aching confusion, like waking from a long dream to find that the dream was real and the waking world was a lie. General Ashraf Khan, the lion of 100 battles, suddenly looked old and small. He pulled a wooden stool from the corner and sat down heavily, his knees cracking. He did not try to touch her. He did not demand recognition. He simply began to speak, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. 20 years ago, he had been a young major stationed near the volatile border of Marin, a small village of farmers and herders. His wife, Amara, had refused to stay behind at the base. She was stubborn, she was brave, and she believed that their 6-month-old daughter, Zara, deserved to know the land of her ancestors. So they had rented a small house on the edge of the village. It was a peaceful time. The general, then just Major Khan, would return from patrols to find Amara singing lullabies and Zara giggling, her face still smooth and perfect. Then came the night of the raid. Enemy militants, disguised as merchants, had slipped through the border. Their target was a nearby ammunition depot, but they took a wrong turn and ended up in the residential lane. They threw grenades and fired rockets. One shell hit the small house. Major Khan had been at the depot that night, leading a security drill. By the time he reached the house, it was a burning skeleton. He found Amra's body near the doorway. She had been trying to shield the baby. But Zara was nowhere to be found. He had searched the wreckage with his bare hands until his fingers bled. Rescue workers pulled him away. They found a small, charred blanket and assumed the baby had perished. The local mullah declared them both martyrs. A funeral was held. The army gave him a medal and a letter of condolence. He had carried that photograph in his pocket ever since, a talisman against forgetting, but he had never stopped asking questions. Years later, A captured militant confessed that a local woman had been seen fleeing the fire with a crying infant. The woman, a childless widow from a neighboring valley, had taken the baby to an orphanage 2 provinces away, fearing that the army would blame her for the attack. The general had spent his leave time visiting orphanages, showing the photograph, asking for a girl with a distinctive mark. But the widow had told no one about the burns. And the orphanage had changed the baby's name to hide her past. Zara listened without moving. Her left hand slowly rose to her scarred cheek. The skin felt hot, as if the fire had never really gone out. She thought of all the lonely nights, all the cruel jokes, all the times she had prayed to a god she was not sure existed, asking why she had been marked. And now she knew. She had not been cursed by a cooking fire. She had been blessed by a war. Her scars were not a punishment. They were the price of survival. "Why did you stop looking?" she asked, her voice flat. The general flinched. "I never stopped," he said. But the trail went cold. The orphanage burned down in a flood. The records were lost. "I had nothing but a name and a photograph. I am a general now. I command armies. But I could not find one little girl." He paused, his throat working. "I thought you were dead, Zara. I buried you in my heart every single day. I visited your mother's grave every Friday. I spoke to your picture before every battle. You were the reason I kept fighting. I thought if I could save other children, other families, then your death would mean something." A bitter laugh escaped Zara's lips. "And now you find me, in a shop, mending torn pants for farmers who won't look me in the eye." The general stood up. He was still stiff, still military, but there was a softness in his gaze that no one in the army had ever seen. "I will spend every day from now until my last breath making it up to you," he said. "You are my daughter, my blood, my heart." For a long moment, Zara said nothing. The sewing machine hummed in the silence, a mechanical heartbeat. Then she did something that surprised them both. She picked up the torn uniform from the floor, folded it neatly, and placed it in the general's hands. "Your meeting is in 2 hours," she said. "You should go." The general looked at the uniform, then at her. He understood. She was not rejecting him. She was testing him. He had walked away from a burning house once. He would not walk away again. He sat back down on the wooden stool. "Let them wait," he said. And for the first time in 20 years, Zara smiled. The scars on her left side pulled the smile into a strange, lopsided shape, but it was genuine. It was real. It was the smile of a girl who had finally found a place to belong. Over the next few weeks, the village of Lospur witnessed something it could not explain. The feared General Ashraf Khan, the man who made colonels tremble and enemies flee, was seen every evening at a tiny tailoring shop. He would sit on the wooden stool, drinking cheap tea from a chipped cup, while Zara worked. He told her stories of her mother, how Amara could sew even better than Zara, how she had once stitched a wedding dress in a single night, how she had laughed like a bell ringing. Zara, in turn, showed him her work, the perfect seams, the invisible patches, the delicate embroidery she had taught herself from old books. The villagers began to whisper again. But this time the whispers were different. "The general's daughter," they said, and the words carried a strange new weight. The women who had once pulled their shawls tight now nodded respectfully. The men who had avoided her shop now brought their best uniforms. The children who had pointed and giggled now stared with wide, curious eyes, as if her scars had become a kind of medal. One day, a senior officer arrived from the capital. He had heard rumors that the general was spending too much time in a civilian shop, neglecting his duties. He found the general sitting on the floor, surrounded by bolts of fabric. While Zara measured his shoulders for a new dress uniform, "General Khan," the officer said stiffly, "this is highly irregular." General Ashraf Khan looked up, and his eyes were calm. "This is my daughter," he said simply, "and she is teaching me how to be a father. That is more important than any war." The officer saluted and left. He did not report the incident. Some things, he decided, were beyond the reach of military regulations. Zara never left Lospur. She did not want palaces or titles or the loud, confusing life of the capital. But she did accept one thing, a small, framed photograph that now hung on the wall of her shop. It showed a young major, a smiling woman, and a baby with an unmarked face. Underneath, in the general's handwriting, were the words, "The family that fire could not destroy," and every evening, when the general finished his duties, he would walk through the mud to the little shop. He would sit on the wooden stool. He would drink the cheap tea. And he would watch his daughter sew, her scarred face peaceful in the fading light. He had found her. And in finding her, he had finally come home.